Welcome to Just Champions, a podcast by AEquitas, which focuses on the prosecution of sexual violence, domestic violence, stalking, and trafficking from the perspective of the prosecutors who handle these cases, the allied professionals with whom they collaborate, and the victims and communities that they serve. I'm Jennifer Long, the CEO and co-founder of AEquitas, and a former prosecutor specializing in adult and child sexual abuse, intimate partner violence, stalking, and sexual exploitation. And this is the inaugural season of Just Champions, where we will explore the ways prosecutors can influence justice and safety through the lens of our guests who impacted safety and justice for victims in ways you may not expect. In this episode, I'm joined by Dalia Racine, the Douglas County District Attorney. Dalia was elected in 2020, and she is the first woman and first person of color to serve in this role in her community. Dalia brings almost 20 years of prosecutorial experience to serve her community. She has specialized in homicides, crimes against women and children, and human trafficking. Dalia also served as an attorney advisor with AEquitas. Dalia, hello.
Hi.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me.
It's great to see you.
You too.
Great to see you. Yes, I mean, I would be remiss if I didn't start by saying, definitely riding the coattails of a former attorney advisor who is now the elected DA of Douglas County, Georgia. And so we're very proud to know that we were a part of your career along the way.
100%. And I can't tell you how much I talk about my experience with AEquitas as part of what built me to be prepared to do the work here in Douglas County. So I am grateful for having had the opportunity to be with AEquitas.
Well, that's amazing. And as I told you when you joined us, that was one of the best days of my professional career, having you accept our invitation to join on. And of course. And so it'd be really interesting. I know you and I know each other for a long time, but I think it would be great if you could talk a little bit about your career in the law to get started.
Sure. So I was a late decider to actually even go to law school. It wasn't until my senior year in college, and I was like, let me just take this LSAT and see what happens. And so through that process, as many law students do, had opportunities for externships and summers and internships and all the things, and went through it like a trial and error period of figuring out what I wanted to do, but eventually landed on becoming a prosecutor. Started out at the Fulton DA's office. I was there for about 7 years. For those that don't know, Fulton County, you may have heard of a little place called Fulton County, but it's in Atlanta, Georgia, and started out there in the complaint room, which very non-traditional attorney hours. My first shift was 4 p.m. to 2 a.m. Working in the complaint room. And so we would get all the initial reports coming from the officers to screen and to review and make charging decisions before they went to first appearance. So it was fascinating. It was like a really interesting way to learn the law and to kind of get exposed to all of the crimes that were happening kind of at that prime time of the evening. And then also just like was a great teaching tool, I think, generally. And from there went to trial line and then went to our CWAC unit that was there, which was crimes against women and children, and eventually got put in the homicide unit. I then got recruited to join DeKalb County District Attorney's Office, which is right next door to Fulton County, has a little bit of Atlanta, but also Decatur, Georgia, and several other cities in Atlanta, metro Atlanta area. And there was in their crimes against children unit. I had the honor of starting their first human trafficking unit there. And then also had an opportunity to grow it, develop it, collaborate with the community, started a what we called the Date Watch unit, which we stole from Nancy O'Malley's office after we went to go visit them. We loved what they were doing out there and copied a lot of what they were doing and innovated and launched that. And then joined AEquitas for a couple years, and then became the elected in Douglas County in 2020 after running for it for 10 years and finally got into office.
It's funny. I'm hearing you talk. I mean, there's so much in that amazing career arc, and I want to get into some of it. But when you're talking about the complaint room, I totally hear you. Uh, the graveyard shift,
Yes.
ours was a little bit different. Ours was like a 7 to 7 shift. We had a 12-hour shift, and it's a terrible shift. You're going from day to night. I think we also moved back day to night, but you do get to learn the law. You get to review the complaints. You're getting to see a whole broad base of things. When I say the application of the law, you're getting to see a lot of what's happening in your community
Yeah.
in that rotation. So I was really grateful for it afterwards too, but I'm laughing. A lot of instant soup, as I
Yes.
recall,
And
all the
did
night.
you find, I found like grocery shopping was so much easier because it was like, the middle of the day. It was like me and the seniors at the local Kroger. So that was also a perk if you want to find one.
No, you're right, actually. And you have to force yourself to go to bed in the day. I mean, I think people listening who are, doctors or maybe working in law enforcement or different shifts in the middle of the night, especially when you're going back and forth, you have to figure out how to make sure you go to sleep
Yeah.
at some point in there,
It's a big
not to do all of your chores.
thing. Very true.
And you talked a little bit about being late coming to prosecution. Can you talk about more about what was that push that made you decide that this was a worthy career,
Yeah.
at least start for you? I'm not sure if you saw yourself staying in it as long, but what was it that drew you to prosecution?
Yeah, I think, well, I have to start with my upbringing. My father is a retired law enforcement officer. So I grew up around the entire culture, my entire life of law enforcement. And my mother, her main work throughout her profession was as a legal assistant. And it was funny because my mom, my entire upbringing, I'm sure that you can't detect this at all in the years that we've known each other, but I'm known to argue and to make my point known and all the things and, don't let things lie. And so she was like, you are destined to be a lawyer. She was like, except you won't be outside the office. You're going to be in it. And so she would tell me that. And I was like, in my normal bratty teen demeanor was telling her, I'm going to do what I want to do with my life, not what you want to do. And so I was very reluctant to tell her that I had actually decided to apply to law school because it felt like she won. But in that time, like I talked about those different externships internships that I had, which is why I always tell all the law students I talk to, explore, do things you thought you would never be interested in, just so you can have a process of elimination so you don't end up going into something that you hate. But I mean, it's huge. The process of elimination was huge. So my first summer, I was in Miami-Dade Public Defender's Office, working in their intake section at the jail. Really fascinating experience, but came to learn like it felt kind of powerless. It was like you're always begging for something. You're always asking for something and don't have the actual authority to make the decisions. And I was like, I don't know that I like that posture of things to do what needs to be done. And then went to Fulton DA's office as an intern. Absolutely loved it. And I feel like it was just to make sure I did a summer in Charleston at a small private firm, which great, like firm, nothing bad to say about the firm, but you just know when you're not with your people. Right. And it was just very obvious to me.
Right.
Confirmed, like, yes, prosecution is where I felt most at home and continued with that internship. But I think on a more broader scale, it's kind of like 3 pillars that really pushed me into this. And if you ask my team, they're so sick of hearing it, but it's really what has driven for me to be in the space to do this work. And everybody has their own life experiences, their own perspectives that brings them into this space. But for me, it was 3. It was number 1, my own victimization as a child and feeling like I didn't have anybody to advocate for me and wanting to advocate for others that don't necessarily are given a voice, for people who feel that they're forgotten, for people who feel like people don't care about them. Secondly was my brother who suffered from addiction pretty much the last 30 plus years of his life. So most of the time that I interacted with him, that I had recollection of him being in my life, was him being in a state of addiction. And so I knew that he was in and out of jails, in and out of prisons, and recognized that as a prosecutor, we have this opportunity to be a touch point for innovation, for change. And, we unfortunately are often left to deal with the shortfalls of society where all of our other systems have failed. We are left to kind of pick up that weight. And so having that opportunity to innovate. And then the last piece is, being in this world as a woman of color, married to an amazing man, have 3 wonderful children, in raising 3 Black children, and knowing the realities of the criminal justice system, knowing that we have had disparate impact on communities of color, that I wanted to make sure that the work that I did as a line prosecutor all the way up to an elected, that we could show that this system could be equitable. We could try to fix maybe what was done wrong in the past, which seemed like really, really lofty goals. But if you don't try,
Right.
how can you ever make change? And so those are the 3 things that really shaped and pushed me, motivated me to become a prosecutor, because I felt like I could fulfill those passion projects, if you will, within this one profession.
No, and that's incredible. I mean, I think taking the personal experience and having it informed your lived experience as a survivor, having it informed your lived experience professionally.
Yeah.
And I think that's the beauty of the rule of law or criminal justice system when it's working the way it's supposed to work. It
Mhm.
is a system that should be blind to a person's, high standing in a community or low standing in a community, their race, their ethnicity, what's brought them somewhere, and really try to search for the truth, achieve justice, be thoughtful. And I've always really admired that about you. I know you and I got to work on one of my favorite projects at AEquitas, Just Exits, and just the way, again, innovating, because that's a classic example and for people listening, that's one of our projects. It's privately funded, and it works with sexually exploited women and girls primarily, but also persons, trying to ensure that when they're engaging with the criminal justice system as defendants or witness or victims, that they're not pushed deeper into exploitation, that we're giving them an exit path out of the life. And I think a lot of your experience on the ground as a prosecutor, you came into us, already with a record of trying to innovate and think about true justice. What does it look like? Not just the application of a law, but what does it look like all the way through, and really help bring that voice there.
Yeah.
So it's, even though I know you and I've heard you say some of these things, each time we talk about it, I really get a deeper vision into what brought you into prosecution. And you really have touched on it, but could you talk a little bit about what then brought you to the crimes of sexual violence, domestic violence, human trafficking and exploitation, stalking, because as we know, that cuts across all the crimes.
Yeah.
What made you decide to focus there?
Yeah. So I would say that I didn't go into prosecution seeking out to be a sex crimes prosecutor, which I know a lot of people do, which I think is admirable. I think it's great. It was because I would try cases in the trial line that they were like, go push her now to the crimes against women and children. And I gotta be honest, first going in there, I had to have a conversation with myself and say, self, can we handle this? Like, given things that I experienced, is it going to, am I mentally, emotionally capable to handle this? And my very first case in our Crimes Against Women and Children unit was a CSAM case, child sexual exploitation. And so it was with known victims. And I had to sit there and watch it with our, she wasn't an advocate. She was a forensic interviewer in the unit, but she also happened to be like our de facto therapist for our Crimes Against Women and Children unit. And I had to sit there with her and go through watching it. And when I tell you I broke down, I was like, how can y'all do this? Like, this is awful. And so, she talked me through it and we had a very, impactful conversation. And, it really dawned on me that we have to have people who care, who this impacts, but who can also do the work the right way. And so just kind of dug in from there. And to the point of what we were talking about before, that oftentimes it's who's given voice and recognizing that as a system, oftentimes similarly, there's disparate treatment of communities of color that are victimized as well, like dismissed claims of assault or minimizing things that
Yep.
a victim may disclose. And so understanding the obligation to also stand in that gap, which is how we just kind of dug in. And also, quite honestly, the challenge of it, right? I mean, would you agree that these are kind of some of the toughest cases that you can handle?
They are, yes, I agree. They have some of the most intricate areas of law that are so fact dependent on how it's analyzed. You have the built in this bias against victims who, from jump, the public and the public, that's also people in the system. The community is sort of set to be very skeptical just by the nature of the report itself. So that you're dealing with that and the biases that come in, and the fact that perpetrators they spot vulnerabilities right
Yeah.
way ahead and know exactly how the public's going to react. So, and then you may be the only person in that victim. Every victim, witness, survivor comes at it differently, and
Mhm.
sometimes you're the sole person who seems like they are listening.
Yeah.
And when I say on their side, I mean, we're prosecutors, right? We don't represent the victim, but in our role, when we're bringing a case, we don't have doubts when we're bringing it forward. And so you're maybe the only one standing by the victim at that point.
Mhm.
Um, but yes, no, I know what you said. I think that's
Yeah.
one of the things that makes it so challenging and so important. When I listen to you again, you have such an understanding, so compassionate. So you've got that ability to really, your presence is supportive of a victim. But you're right. You're very smart, obviously. I know
You
where you
maybe
where you went to
overselling
school,
it,
what you
but
teach. No. And so, right. So it's a challenge. So you're also prepared. So you're
yeah,
going in that courtroom and you're prepared for the challenge.
absolutely. I think that people like for the professional from the professional side, right? There's the personal, there's the passion for the work, but from
Mhm.
the professionalism standpoint of truly getting into some of the most complex scenarios, cases, all those things. I mean, that part's rewarding too. If you are looking to satiate that just really that need to just dig in and challenge yourself and challenge, what can be done in these cases. So I think it was all of that, honestly. And then specifically to HT, man, it was crazy. So I was minding my business in Fulton County, handling my caseload, and I had this case. Um, Pimping a person under 18 was the offense because we did not have a human trafficking statute in Georgia at the time. And I met with my victim who was 15 at the time when the offenses occurred. But by the time we went to trial, she was about 17, almost 18. Talked
Mm.
with her. We understood the dynamics of the case. She had a pimp who sold her to a cable guy in order for his play sister to get her cable cut back on.
Mhm.
So, in exchange for having sex with this 15-year-old, he turned the cable back on for this individual. And I remember reading it and being like, okay, we're gonna have some challenges, but we'll figure it out. We pushed through. We tried the case and we secured a conviction. And as was part of the course of how the office operated, they sent out a press release. And when I tell you, like, all of a sudden, we got all these community letters. People were so proud of the work that we did. And I'm like, what happened? I legit did not understand what happened. And so then got invited to speak on panels, like all these different types of things. And it was really there that I became educated on the realities of human trafficking, even though we had not properly labeled it yet in the state of Georgia, but
Mhm.
heard from survivors and service providers and like really had an awakening of like, oh, this is like a thing. This is an
Yeah.
issue. And we have been grossly ignoring it, as a prosecution. And it also dawned on me that I wasn't that much different from her exploiter because I literally had used this child to get the testimony I needed to go on and convict her abuser but in turn did not give her anything in return. Didn't connect her to services, didn't do what we were supposed to. We tried, we were like, hey, you should probably talk to somebody, but
Hmm.
it not understanding the dynamics of it, like, missed a huge opportunity. And that was also like an awakening for me in the sense that I was like, we did an awful job here. Like, we got the conviction, but we did not leave her any better than we found her. We did not help her to find a pathway to healing. All these different things that I think are commonplace now that we're well
Yeah.
entrenched. This is 2008, I think it was, maybe even earlier, 2000, and yeah, somewhere around there.
Yeah. I mean, commonplace because learning. You
Yeah,
were learning from and I think the critical piece of, and any of us, if we're being honest, we look back at a case and think, okay, how could I have done it better? And then as you do more of this work, it becomes more obvious what you didn't know back then. So if we move
100%.
forward, it's as a result of a lot of your insight.
Yeah, well, and I think it was in hoping to get, like, gosh, I don't want to even say forgiveness. That's not the right word, but like never wanting to make that mistake again, like, just
Yeah.
have to do better. And from there, it just kind of grew legs and ran. I actually got moved to the homicide unit not too long after there, where coincidentally, a lot of my victims were victims of domestic violence, victims of sexual assault, victims of human trafficking, or there were overtones of that occurred as part of the fact pattern. And so I never really escaped it, even in the homicide unit. It was just kind of the worst case scenario, of what can occur if we don't deal with it on the front end. And then I had one of the most significant cases I've ever tried with my shero to this day, with a young lady who was sold by her stepdad, just really horrific facts. And that was one of my last cases in Fulton County, was securing a conviction for, um, against her father, who received a significant sentence. I don't believe he will ever be paroled here in the state of Georgia. And I still stay in touch with her to this day, um, just because she was so significant in my life, in
Yeah.
how I saw these cases and how I dealt with these cases, and seeing how nobody wanted to believe her.
Yeah.
Um, her family members, her, like, eventually she had supportive family members that helped her to disclose to law enforcement, but it was like a one paragraph police report that we got on this guy who had sexually assaulted her and sold her to hundreds of men. We found dozens of similar transaction victims, like, and just to see how dismissive our system was of somebody who was so tragically and tremendously harmed, really pushed me to want to do something different, which was why when I was being recruited by DeKalb County to come join their crimes against children unit, I was clear that, like, this is a priority for me to develop a response to this in a coordinated, collaborative way. And luckily, we were able to do that with a lot of work. We were able to finally get to a place where we could have uh, a coordinated response to human trafficking in DeKalb County.
Yeah. So can you talk a little bit more about that police report?
Yeah, sure. So the police report we received, was about one paragraph long. And this was despite the fact that she had been sexually assaulted by this man for years. She had been sold probably to hundreds of men. All of these really horrific things. And the response from the law enforcement agency was a one paragraph report. And that just really illustrated to me kind of, the need for us to have a more collaborative, educated, comprehensive response when we get these type of disclosures, which when I was recruited to DeKalb, I really wanted to emphasize in that process, to say, I want to start a unit. I want to focus on this topic because I felt, based on my perception, it was so neglected in the field of prosecution, at the time, that we really needed to hone in and focus and develop a niche of specialization on how to handle these cases from start all the way through to hopefully finding that pathway to healing and thriving for our survivors.
No, and it's interesting because a lot of the things that you talked about in the beginning, the things that brought you to prosecution, disparate impact of both of victimization in underserved communities, sometimes in communities of color, and the disparate response. I think sometimes we've really we've the the pendulum has swung so much maybe on looking at people accused of crimes that we've forgotten how this impacts victims. And I
Yeah.
think about, especially in human trafficking and sexual exploitation, and I think this is one of the first things we worked on, although through that Just Exits project, although you were working with the sites and we were working with your insight on an amicus brief
Mhm.
in a case where the defense was trying to bring in former prostitution related convictions
Mhm.
against victims
Yeah.
who were to demonstrate somehow that they were not credible or to try to be relevant for consent. And we were really, and that's a whole other argument that, of course,
Right.
the state pushed back on, and we as amicus were pushing back with them. But it allowed us to get into wrongful arrest and convictions for victims
Yeah.
of human trafficking and exploitation for either prostitution related and other crimes. And that's something I think that doesn't get talked about. It's starting to get talked about, obviously, a lot more with forced criminality, again, thanks to your work. I don't know
Yeah.
if you want to talk about that.
Well, I think it's the kudos belongs to those who are brave enough to give voice to a system that did them wrong in the first
Right.
place, and I say that with the caveat of like, obviously, when people first see a crime, they arrest, they do, it is a wheel with which we turn all the time, which is why, in my leadership role, we try to emphasize the humanity of individuals, regardless of who is involved in this process, because knowing a person's story is so important. And I could tell you in the time that we worked, I mean, when we went to DeKalb, I had maybe two human trafficking cases. We were working on getting the legislation passed when I was still in Fulton. And so we had maybe two cases, maybe not developed that great, but by the time we left, we had dozens. We probably had close to like 75 cases just by increasing awareness, increasing training. But I say that to circle back to your point as to like this forced criminality. I can't tell you how many times that I went to go and speak to my victims in jail. Like how many times they were sitting there waiting on some type of offense, some type of charges, whether it's directly related or a collateral damage to their trafficking experience, that I went to more jails across metro Atlanta than I think I ever was when I was working homicides and dealing with like, how do I find my
Mm,
witnesses in those
mhm.
cases? And so, how easily we, as a society, as a culture, um, dismissed and diminished what that victimization does, and impugn criminality on survival instincts without understanding, getting that deeper understanding. Like we saw it all the time,
Yeah.
and really, our best educators, as you know, were the survivors to tell us, like, yo, this is what I was going through. And instead of getting like a helping hand, I got put back in jail. Like, I came to jail with bruises all
Yep.
over my body, and all anybody cared about was the cocaine in my pocket. Like,
Oh, yeah, and you're also, I mean, you are reminding, I mean, victims that are involved in sex trafficking, there is an exploitation. There's sexual violence that's happening, co-occurring. We know individuals in the life are targeted at high rates for brutal victimization. There's intimate partner violence that they could be going through, with the link between stalking and sexual exploitation. Uh, and again, your insight. I know you trained a lot about that before we were able to work together at AEquitas and while at AEquitas. And, as a leader of Douglas County, as the elected, how have you brought that education into how you set up the office and have prepared your staff to better identify these cases and better to, implement those lessons learned to really provide truly victim centered, right, approach?
absolutely. I'll say it's not easy.
Yeah.
I think it's similar to for those who have been blessed with the opportunity to birth children, that like people talk about it, you read books about it, like all these things, but you don't really know what it's like even
Yep.
raising kids. Like you don't know what it's like until you're in it. And so I feel like being DA is very similar to that.
I
You
hear you.
talk to
Well,
people. I read about it,
haven't been a DA, but raising the kids, yes.
all the things, right? And so there's
Yes.
really experiential learning, I think, is the only true learning that you have in a lot of these scenarios, including becoming an elected. And so with that, with being able to be in the space, it was really determining first off, like, where are we? Where are
Yeah.
we with like the office structure? And so it took a lot of foundational um, establishment before we could get to me. That was the 200 level. While victim centered is the core foundation of the work that we do, it was also still like, hey, here's how we're going to like open a case file, you
Mhm.
know? And so I think that a lot of times when somebody who has such a specialized knowledge gets into these positions of leadership that are broader encompassing, it's, in my mind, I was like, we're going to go in, we're going to have all these sweeping changes as to how we deal with our sex crimes and our IPV and our crimes against children and our human trafficking. And then you realize like how big the mountain is that you are pushing.
Mhm.
And so eating the elephant one bite at a time, which is the only way that elephants are to be eaten, um, you realize, okay, well, let's first start here so that we could build the trust, the rapport with the team, so that when we
Yep.
then talk about these more elevated asks, that we have more trust from them,
Mhm.
that there's more buy-in as to what we were speaking about, because, it's not everybody's passion and you've got to recognize that. And we have to understand that there are biases that exist, obviously, inside. And so I say all that to say that strategically, we worked on really building the foundation first. And then we introduced the trainings. You guys have been amazing. I plug y'all all the time. We called
Thank
you
you.
guys so much to be like, please come talk to the team about this. Come talk about IPV. Come talk about DV. Come talk about, all of the things, sexual assault and trafficking, because for coming from a really large office, Fulton County, DeKalb County, to the office that I lead, which we're a total team of about 52 people, it's different. The resources are different. The access to things is different. And so having a resource like AEquitas to lean into was just undeniably like just instrumental to our success of getting the information to the team. And so not to mention I took office when a little thing called COVID had started.
Right.
So
And
you
again,
only
I
knew
mean,
really
and
kind of work.
we rely on the trainings because they're interactive we're learning
Yeah.
also from
Yeah.
you and from your team on the emerging issues.
Yeah.
COVID, a great example. Okay,
100%.
now you're in there navigating something that we've never seen before, putting these victims that we've just talked about at greater risk and challenging legal, the procedures and the laws that are the underpinning of the whole system, as well as how do we bring people safety. So you were one of the people on the ground teaching us what it looked like to operate in that world.
Well, I appreciate that. And I appreciate how generously you coined, like, it was lessons learned. There was a lot of trial and error involved in that process. But I do think that's also a key to successful leadership is humility of like course correcting and
Yeah.
being like, hey, that did not work. So let's try something else. So in addition to like really emphasizing the training, kind of that, you know, adult learning model of like, let's expose you to these things and give you the tools and techniques, the broader thing that we try to do as well is introduce the team to perspectives, hearing from different individuals, helping them to understand, you know, how our system is viewed from different lenses, hopefully giving them the insight so when they have the decision making, because you can't micromanage. There's no way
Right.
that I could
Yep.
go in and know what offer is on every single case coming through our office. But what I try to do and our team tries to do is to introduce to those broader perspectives. So when you do have your discretion in decision making, you have a more complete, comprehensive view of these topics and these issues at hand. So when you are making the decisions, you are taking into consideration all of those things.
No, and that's great. And any specific training on the base when you were coming in after you assessed that you felt like, okay, that this is a team at a base needs to
Mhm.
have these one, four, whatever
Yeah.
content topics that they're trained on so that they can at least spot the issues and get more information on them.
Yeah. So for me, I love the institutes. I love the
Mm.
institutes that Equitas puts on because it's what we try to mimic here, the collaborative model, talking to people, figuring out like best solutions. It's so to me, it's a dual learning system of not only are you getting the traditional learning through the lecture piece, but then you're immediately asked to integrate it and how would you apply it? And here's the scenarios. And so that to me, I think it's huge. I love that learning style.
And
Uh,
for people listening, the institutes, they are, they're case based. So we are following a fact pattern through basically the way a prosecutor would from initial report on throughout. And like you said before, that decision points, trying to give our participants the opportunity, allowing them a safe place to apply the information that they're getting either throughout the institute or practices in their own lives to make those decisions, and
yes.
then to re-explore them afterwards with either new information given to help better inform future decisions. Try and make it as real life as possible with a multidisciplinary team, health, victim advocacy, law enforcement, prosecutors, both those practicing and AEquitas staff who are former prosecutors, bringing it together and having it very interactive. So again, people are working through cases, a case that it tries to incorporate a lot of the dynamics, facts, legal issues that they're going to see in their case in
Mhm.
a way that allows for mistakes to be made so that they can learn.
And you know what I loved about them too, Jen, is the survivors that participate in the
Yeah.
institutes,
Yep.
the community resource providers who
Yep.
I love it because they come in and they like humble us, like as the
Mhm.
prosecutors to be like, I know that's what you thought that we needed, or I know that's what you thought this meant, but you got it wrong. And
Right.
that so is like one of my favorite parts of the institutes is watching.
It's so, and it's for a topic for, I would say a topic for another call, but for people who
Yeah.
are interested, have had some great webinars on lived experience and being trafficked, by one that you did with one of our experts talking about how evidence is perceived in a sex trafficking case where you're working with someone, one of the individuals who are under the control of the trafficker, who might be perceived as having all of these, favorable attention, able to sit in the front seat, able to sleep in the bed, and through the eyes of the survivor saying, really, you thought that that was something that was a benefit to me? Well, let me tell you how
Yeah.
that actually exposed me to harm. And you did that, Dalia. Actually, I feel like you and Shamir really help set that up and exactly help give insight to the prosecutors so that they can look at case of sexual violence, sexual exploitation, and understand um, the evidence in a new light, and
Yeah.
then be able to argue better.
Absolutely. And all credit to those that are able to bring voice to their lived experience because that's not easy to kind of lay your soul bare to your victimization and talk through it and allow people to challenge it and have to explain. But
Yeah,
they do such a phenomenal job, the experts that you all bring in, of really kind of bracing themselves for it and then just delivering it with mastery that really the prosecutors in the room, it's I mean, it's
they walk
undeniable
away
that
with.
they can't understand like the fact of this is the real impact. This is what's really being done in your decision making.
Yeah, no, and you're right. We wish our law students were exposed to that too, because the law school curriculum, I think it's really opening up a lot of opportunities for clinics. But still, as we often talk about, you're not learning in law school a lot of the things that you need when you hit the ground as a prosecutor. That we're really relying on our multidisciplinary team. But having said that, when you're recruiting out there,
Hmm.
do you recruit from law schools? Are you recruiting law students? And what are you looking for?
Everywhere we recruit. It's we faced when I first came into office, it was a really, really difficult time in the first couple of years, just because what we labeled the great reshuffling was happening here in Metro Atlanta, and I'm sure across the nation. We had some very lean times, and what we talked about is the imagery, if you will, of prosecution, the work that's being done, and so strategically, I think it was just giving voice to what our philosophies are. Like the fact that
Mhm.
you can reimagine what prosecution looks like. This is an empowering place to be if you truly want to be system change. I spoke on panels. Any panel that somebody invited me to, I would show up to talk about it, to say, I understand that this is an impression, but if you truly want to make change, you have to be inside the system to make that change, on all the different levels where it's needed. Um, Talked to a lot of law school students. We were working on continuing to develop a robust internship program, starting with college students. We had one or two high school students too. And that was just to
Fantastic.
increase the exposure. We don't know if they'll ever actually get into law. We don't know if they'll ever actually come back to us. But what we want to do is really capture an accurate narrative of what you can do as a prosecutor. And to challenge, if there are misconceptions out there, to challenge them with people who have been in our system, who have watched it, who have engaged in it for months on end, to also be, for lack of a better term, our credible messengers, to talk about, no, this is what actually happens in the DA's office. This is actually what the decision points look like, all those different types of things. And I think that also in being transparent about my philosophies, being transparent about how I want our office to operate within itself, has also been a recruitment tool for people who are maybe aligned in vision, for people who maybe want to see what that's like, for them to be able to come here, to be able to work and experience that. But I will say, from a recruitment standpoint, it is extremely challenging here, specifically in the state of Georgia, where we face really egregiously low salary rates. And so coming in, having to convince my board of commissioners, these are the things they don't teach you in law school, or you don't think you have to do as the elected, but going before your board of commissioner to argue for an increase in your budget because you cannot hire people at the abysmal starting rate that you have currently in your budget. Those types of things that we really had to work on for our recruitment retention, reimagining what the work week looks like. So we are 4 days in office, 1 day remote. And so doing small micro things like that, because the pay is the pay, right? We got increases, but the pay is the pay. And so figuring out ways that we could increase that recruitment retention. And then the other piece that we hold sacred is the culture that we create here. We do not force people to just blindly comply with everything that is said. We don't think that our exec team is the only one with good ideas. And so we're constantly fostering a spirit of collaboration, of community, of communication. And when we face bumps and we face challenges in that pathway, of making space for courageous conversations so that we can get past it. But whenever we're interviewing, that is what we emphasize in the interview, that our priority is our culture. We could teach you the rest. We want to hear from you about what you think. I don't care how long you've been doing this work. We want to hear your opinion. I don't care what you do in this office. We want to hear your opinion on how we can improve. And that's really been, extremely helpful for us as we continue to navigate and shape and fix things. And, even things that I put in place and be like, well, that didn't work. Let's.
Yeah, no. And I love that, right? I love that you're looking at people you're recruiting thinking, and you're going to come here. And if this is the culture you want to pursue, we're going to learn from you too. We want to hear how you see things to do better. Absolutely. I mean, from what it does sound like you would, you would encourage law students to be continue to consider this as a career. I mean, everything you've talked about, I'm going to put it out there. This part of my life where I was a prosecutor, and now maybe the second best job, being able to support prosecutors and be able to meet people like you. I think it is an area where you feel like you can do something positive. In a situation where someone has had everything taken away, trust, family, safety, justice, you can try to be part of the change. And it sounds like you would encourage law students that this is prosecution is a place to make that change.
100%. 100%. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I want to put my application in for your office because it sounds like a place I would want to work in.
We don't currently have any openings, but we will keep you in mind.
I love it. Well, I'm going to hold you to that.
Absolutely.
And Dalia, anything else you want to close on? Because you've been very generous with your time, and it's been extraordinary. Again, just hearing how the to become a prosecutor, and then all those things you've been able to impact along the way and the different roles, some of which you may not have foreseen.
Yeah, no,
Any,
I appreciate number one, I appreciate the opportunity. Like, I love this discussion. This was great. You and I could talk for hours and hours, but
yeah.
we'll spare everybody else that. But I would definitely want to say that this profession, the field of prosecution, has been a gift to me in the sense that I have felt empowered to be courageous, to be bold. I won't sugarcoat There are days it's devastating, the work that we
Mhm.
do.
Yeah.
Um, but there's no better career that I could imagine that can really make you feel like you can be a difference maker on a macro and micro level, um, where I don't feel like this is a passion and a calling to do this work. And it is so important that we get people into this field, into this profession, to understand how profound it is and how important they are in making those missions and goals. And so, yeah, I just appreciate this opportunity. Thank you for
Well,
that.
I couldn't end it any better than that. So, Dalia, I hope that you go on with the rest of your day today. Thank you for doing justice. Thank you for all you're doing for the field and for your community. And I really look forward to continuing this conversation at some point. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Have a great day too.